معيطة مخبة شانت ويتي كل خليجي يوما بشمت قديشوثة عام عليا مرة وثليثة يا كاثوليقة بابريركا بشمت كل أخواتي كليريقي بشمت كل نونة معيطة أمرة مصر يمثلتا قديشتا بشمت كل هوثاكية كندا قبولو خلقشانا مهيمنتا كريستين آيت إلى خلقتا كشركة بتشريفة إيتا بالقيادة إيتوات أرثوذكسية. البت أخواني إدمون إلياس أو بتقارئ قاتوكم حكمة خبراني من خيوتا مهيمنتا وبعد بتقارخلا بتقابيلا خاهم زمتا بعد خناويلكم بقارئ نهاية بإنجليز إلى نهاية بسورة أخوان إدمون أو بتشفركلنا لشامة إنجليز. هايتم بسيمة رابع.
Dear parishioners, today we have the honor of hosting an avid researcher, the author of numerous articles and books on the Eastern Orthodox and the Oriental Church and the other churches. In the fields of history, theology, and spirituality. Her last book is entitled Relations and Exchanges Between the Eastern and Orthodox Churches in the Past and Today. Dear parishioners, it is my privilege and honor to introduce to you Miss Christine Chaillot. Please. One more time, please. Hands. ميقرت كريستين شاو إلى صبرا درابة مليانة ممرة وكتاوة إلى كتوتاي أو إيتا أرثوذكسيتا بتمدنخا وإعطاء خينة يوم حقنا ترشيطة تيولوجية وروخا مايوتا كتاوة خارة يديه إلى خد شبهها يسورة وشقلياوة بالإعطاء تمدنخا وإعطاء أرثوذكسيتا دعور وبقام يقرأ كريستين كتابة بيشنا ترجمة الخدسر لشانه.
Well, dear Father, thank you so much for your invitation and for the organization of this morning. So, good morning to all of you. I'm so happy to be in your church, in your big, very large church in Toronto. I happened to visit Toronto some years ago when Emmanuel was still here, and he invited me to have tea in his place, and then we had no time to see the church, and I was sorry about it. But you see, when I knew that I was coming back to Toronto, my first wish was to come and see your church. And not only to see the church, but to see the people, because the church, if it's empty, is not very interesting. So I'm going to speak, I don't know how many minutes, Father?
Okay.
No, but you must guide me. And well, I think I can speak a little bit, but it's much more interesting to have questions. So, you know, because we are together just once in our lifetime, so please, I would love to have your questions so that we can have exchanges while I am here. So somebody was asking me about my life and how did I grew this interest in the Oriental churches of the Middle East and in your church, because as you know, I have written a book about your church. I have seen it in your bookstore. I know that Emmanuel had ordered a certain number of copies. I don't know how many of you have read the book, and well, I can only invite you to read my book in the future. It is called The Assyrian Church of the East, which is the official title of your church, and the subtitle is History and Geography, because I think we always have to link history and geography. Plus, you know your history and your geography, but I also write for outsiders, for people who know nothing about the Church of the East. And the sad fact is that many people in the world, even among Christians, they don't know your church, you know. And this is, of course, very disappointing and very sad, and this is why I wrote this book, for people, to begin to know something about your very ancient church. Because as you know, already at the time of Pentecost in Jerusalem, which can be considered as the foundation of the church, you had people, from what is today Iran and Iraq, who were present at Pentecost. But you have to read the passage again. They speak of people of Mesopotamia, so this is clear. There were people who were speaking Syriac, or you can give other names. And there are names of places known in Iran today. So they also had these Persian people present in Jerusalem for Pentecost. So this is the very beginning of your connection with church history. But people are not so curious, and when they read the text of the history of Pentecost, they read the names, but they don't try to understand where are these places. So this is where your church history begins. So it means that nobody is more apostolic than you. And so, of course, you know that you speak of Syriac language, which is related to Aramaic, which was spoken by Christ. So this is, of course, for you a great norm of being proud, to follow up until today this language with different stages, development of the language. But I know how much you care to keep your language alive, not only in speaking, and I understand that today Father said about 20% of the people here may not understand English but only Syriac, and of course during the liturgy everything is in Syriac, but I have really appreciated to be able, because I don't know Syriac, to follow the liturgy and the liturgical action with the book, which you have, which is very helpful, because you have all these columns with Syriac, English, and the pronunciation. So this is very practical and useful for me, but I think also for your people, for the young people maybe who don't know Syriac very well, and for people who don't know English and they come and settle here, so step by step they can also understand the English text. And this is very important to keep, of course, your Syriac language. People, the question is for the new generations. Are they going to continue to speak and study Syriac, So of course you can push them, but I think what is more important is to open their heart for their history. Because if you push sometimes, you get the opposite result. So how to be pedagogic, I think first of all they must love the church, and then love, understand how rich is your literature of the Church of the East. So of course they should not only repeat the text of the liturgy every Sunday, but they have to understand the deep meaning and the deep teaching which you receive in this text. because it's like a catechism. So they tell you about your faith in this text of the liturgy and in other texts which in your prayers of your church at the East. So it's very important to understand the theological meaning, which means the dogma, the faith of your church, and you have everything in these texts of the liturgy and other texts of your church. So it's good, I think, for the young people, but also for adults, to understand, to study. This is the word, to study, and I underline study, and study the book of the text of the liturgy, and in a parallel way, also other important texts written for your prayers, but also by your church fathers about, yes, it's about your faith, but it can be also about your spiritual life. And this is where I think we have to underline the importance of spiritual life, you know. And of course, we try to purify our hearts and life when we come to church and pray, in church and also when we pray at home and in daily life. But how to keep the spiritual life growing, you know, because it's like you are gardeners of your spiritual life. So if you don't put the seeds at the right time and in the right place in the garden, everything will die. So it's the same in spiritual life. You have to find ways, and one of the ways is to come to church and to pray also at home, and to exercise your Christian commands, let's say, in everyday life. But there are other ways, you know, to grow in spiritual life, and everybody has to grow in his or her own spiritual life. So this is what I wish really for all of you, because you eat every day, and so it's for your body. But never forget that you must also feed your souls and hearts. And this is what I call, you know, to receive spiritual life in different ways, because it will help you to grow in spiritual life and to grow in front of Christ, and to follow what Christ is teaching all of us in his gospel. So this is for me the most important thing. Then, of course, when we speak of study, I think it's so important, of course, to know about your history. And as you may know, your church was the largest church in the world in the Middle Ages, because you had parishes from the Mediterranean Sea all the way eastwards to the Pacific Ocean, because you know that you had a church established in China already in the 7th century, and you were the first Christians to reach China, you know. And of course, they did not know at the Chinese court what Christianity was. So we know of some monks and bishops who arrived there in China in the 7th century, and they showed the gospel book. Probably, most probably, it was translated into Chinese, you know, already, and the people at court said, well, this is a good teaching, you know. They understood the wisdom of the gospel. They understood there was no hatred, there was no fighting, or, you know, no politics, etc. So, just to say things like that, and so they said, well, we allow you to teach the gospel here in the Chinese Empire. This showed that they had a nice welcoming, and also they were given some money, it's the word of today, you know, but a monastery for your church was paid by this Chinese government of that time, and in the outskirts of the capital. So you see, when you have evangelization in this way, which is very peaceful, very respectful. This is the best example. And I think that this is important also for today, because I think this is the best missionary example in history I can give, we can give, you know. That you had no army, you had no weapons. There were some monks coming from the Persian Empire and crossing what we call the Silk Roads across Central Asia, reaching China, and they were living just with a bag and the gospel, you know, so to say, and following the traders, because how to go by themselves, they had to have some guides. So the traders knew very well the Silk Roads, and they were following these traders. And this is how they were wonderful, wonderful missionaries, you know. And we should know more about them and about your church. And so why is your church so little known, not to say sometimes not known at all? And in the introduction preface of my book, Sebastian Rock, who is a very great Syriac scholar, his explanation is that the first history of the church, written in the 4th century, in the 5th century, by Eusebius, he did not mention your church at all. And the reason, according to Sebastian Rock, is that your church was not within the borders of the Byzantine Empire, because, as we said, they were in the Persian Empire. And as you may know, the Persian Empire and the Byzantine empires were fighting all the time, you know. So you were the Christians in the empire of the enemies, you see, for the Byzantines. And so, well, who were you? You know, you were assimilated with the rulers of the Persian rulers. So this may be one explanation, you know, why in this first history, church history, there was no mention of your church. And then eventually they followed back this model, you know. And I must say that even today, in some ecumenical, well, church history books or encyclopedia, I see that they don't mention your church at all, as if you were not even existing. And of course, this is not acceptable. And this was one of the reasons why I decided to write my book. Then, of course, for the last 44 years, I have traveled a lot in the Middle East, because I don't only read in libraries for writing my books. I go to these different countries, I visit the patriarchs, the bishops, the people, the monasteries, etc. And because this is life, you know, you are living people, you are not just a history, you are present, you have communities now all around the world. So I have to see, I have to meet the people, I have to understand who they are, what they think, what they believe, how they worship. This is part of my work before I write, because then I can begin my writing with a different spirit, you know, because you are with me when I write about you. You are with me. Sometimes I cry because I know that how painful was your history. I was afraid this morning to cry because when I am with you, I remember all your dramatic history, and of course it is so painful even for me, even if I am not an Assyrian Christian. And of course, with the events of the last decades in the Middle East, and the fact that many of you were obliged to leave the countries of your ancestors, you know, which is so dramatic, even more dramatic, because you managed to remain Christian for so many centuries, and eventually in the 20th, at the end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century, you must leave your country, which I can imagine how painful it is and how difficult it is. And so, of course, I respect your church and your people, not only for the whole past history, but also for the recent history. And of course, I visited Hakkari region some years ago with a scholar of your church called Chaillot. He is from Iraqi origin, born in Australia, and now living in The Hook. And I was so lucky because he's the best expert of your history in Hakkari, and he has visited these places many times. So I was able to see your churches, many for 10 days, many decades of churches. And of course, it is painful because today you don't have one person of the Church of the East. There is nobody, there is no priest, there is no deacon, no one. The Chaldean Church, that is the Catholic branch, from your Assyrian Orthodox Church, they are still present in Turkey. They have their own bishop in Istanbul, but unfortunately, you have nobody left. So who can take care of your ancient archaeological churches in Hakkari? This is, of course, the main question. Because, of course, you still have many churches with their walls, but many churches have lost the roofs. Some are very destroyed. Some could be restored. And, of course, this is, of course, in the hands of Mahawa, but you will see him next week, so maybe you can also ask him this question, what can we do to have a recognition in Turkey today, and how could we contact the people at the Ministry of Culture in Ankara in Turkey, because they are the people who can give you a permission for restoration, at least of your ancient patriarchal church in Kochanes. So the Armenians have managed to have some of their ancient churches restored, like in Ani or Artama, which is near Van. So why not the Church of the East? So for that, of course, you must grow contacts with people, as I said, in Ankara, but we are not going to develop this question. But I think it's most important to keep this heritage, Then the question remains, who will be in charge, to keep these places? Because like in Kochanes, you have to take a four-wheel drive Land Rover. It was March, but there was still a little snow. The road was not very easy, We managed to get there. And, well, who from your community would accept to stay there and look after the place? We have to be also very practical. We can have dreams, but at the same time, we must be very, very practical. But I think for now and the coming generations, these questions must be asked. Then, of course, there are negative sides because people there have, this mentality that you have gold and treasures buried in these churches. Of course, you have the graves of some bishops or patriarchs in some churches. And so they come at night, apparently, and they dig. But you see, if you have a church, let's say of this length, and they begin to dig, and it's 3-4 meters low, after some times you have the walls of the churches which are also shaken and may fall. So instead of taking care of these ancient churches and trying to keep them or restore them, at the time being, it's just the contrary happening. And as I said, there is no one to stop these people. So these are complicated questions, but at least they should be raised. This is my opinion. Then, I don't want to take too much of your time because I hope you have some questions, but another important question for me is the fact that your community has no place in the Holy Land, in Jerusalem, where they used to have, a place and also a place for worship. So what could be organized in the future about this question? So it's not normal, as I said before, you are an apostolic church, which this means you are a very ancient church. How is it possible that you don't even have a place where you can go and worship? So how to organize this? Please ask the question to Mahara. And of course, it is very difficult to find a place in Jerusalem, in the old city today, especially because when people are selling, Palestinian Christians or Muslims, but let's say Palestinian Christians, or you have a Syrian Orthodox Church in Jerusalem, and they have a monastery, and they have a little what you call Syrian Orthodox quarter around the monastery. And I was told that the family sold their houses in the last decades, which if we had known that on time, maybe your community could have bought one of these houses, because also you would have been close to the Syrian Orthodox monastery, which is close to your church. The two patriarchs are friends, The Patriarch Ephraim of the Syrian Orthodox Church is doing everything, I know, at the level of the Middle East Council of Churches to help your church in the Middle East and to respect your church in the Middle East from other churches, So maybe I ask you to pray again. So we have to pray for two miracles. To keep at least Kochanas, but hopefully other churches in Hakkari, and to beg God to find a new place for you in Jerusalem. So, of course, the places are very expensive today in the old city of Jerusalem, especially because as soon as somebody is selling a building, the Jews buy it immediately, and they pay millions of dollars. So this is very, very unfortunate, but this is the reality of today, But at the same time, the Catholic Church in the old city of Jerusalem has so many buildings which are not used any longer because they had so many monastic and communities, and with very few sisters of brothers today. So I think, this is my opinion, so please, it's only my opinion, but it could be a solution that the Catholic Church, which has good relationship with your church, if they were real Christians, they could manage, they could organize for you to have one of their buildings, even small building, But I think this would show real ecumenism, because it is written in the gospel that we must help people who are in need, either if they are not healthy, if they need anything, etc. This is our Christian duty. So the Catholic Church is quite rich and powerful, and I think that, yes, if they want, they can manage, they can organize something. And I know that the present Latin Patriarch in Jerusalem is a very clever man and spiritual. So let's pray that a miracle happens.
On behalf of the Diocese of Canada, we thank you for your speech today. You encourage us, everybody, about our church. We know the history of the church, but we are so happy to see, sorry to say like European, but now you are Assyrian.
Thank you. I feel at home with you.
To help us, others to understand our church, understand our suffering. So today, on behalf of the Toronto parish, we have a gift for you. The gift is a cross. On the cross is written the prayer of La Khumarat Khulla Maudenan, La Ishom Shikham Shebkhenan, Datum Nachman Paghren, Watubaru Kadnaushatan. This prayer was composed by our patriarch Mar Shumon Bar Sabba'i in the 40 years of persecution that the Persian Empire persecuted our Assyrian church. He composed this prayer at the jail with more than 370 that they were prosecuted, and the prosecution was for 40 years. He sang in La Khumaran, "You Lord of all we confess, and you Jesus Christ we glorify, for you give life to our bodies, and you are the Savior of our souls." So this prayer every Sunday, every Holy Mass for Bana Khadisha, we repeat it for 3 times. Everybody repeat it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We are present
Thank you for your
with the gift.
reception. Thank you very much. Beautiful gift. Thank you very much. And I must say, we were speaking of ecumenical. Oh, beautiful. Thank you.
La Khumarat Khulla
You give me
Maudenan.
the translation, please.
I will give you the
English
translation. I will give you the translation.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I must say, we just spoke of your martyrs, who are so many in your church history. But you must know that in the Syriac, which is the book with the lives of the saints of the Eastern Orthodox tradition, we have many names of the martyrs of the Persian church, which is your church. So at least, this is another topic that all Christians of the Middle East have in common. It's martyrdom. So thank you so much for the welcome today.